Let me ask you, who do you think is the oldest mutant out there? Most of us would probably jump straight to Apocalypse, right? Maybe Selene? I mean, they're ancient, they've been around for thousands of years, but what if I told you there's a character who makes them look like they were born yesterday? A mutant who has been around for not thousands, not millions, but 2 billion years. He is Xilo, the First Defender of Arakko. Let's check out his story. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. From a thresholder to terraformer of Mars. Xilo's story started an unbelievable 2 billion years ago. He was part of an ancient group called the Thresholders. When everything fell apart for them, only he and another being named Okara managed to survive. Now, the craziest thing about Xilo is that he's not a single person. He's a walking, talking colony of insects that all think and act as one being. Over his long life, he's been through a lot of changes and has gone by many different names. For most of those 2 billion years, he was known as the First Defender of the Broken Land. He stayed on the living island of Okara and protected it. He was present thousands of years ago when an enemy attacked and split the island in two, which created the new living islands we know today as Krakoa and Arakko. When Arakko was taken into a harsh dimension of Ameth, Xilo went with it, staying with his people for thousands of years and eventually became an important figure. He was part of the Great Ring of Arakko, which is their government, and his specific job was to be the keeper of their history. He recorded and decided what the official history of Arakko would be. We don't know all the details of his life during that time, but at some point he started calling himself Stulgid. He continued to use that name when Arakko returned to Earth after the tournament with Krakoa. Shortly after that, though, he tweaked his name to Xilo, who was Stulgid, and then shortened it to plain old Xilo. When the mutants decided to turn Mars into their new home, Xilo's powers were absolutely essential. Because he can control soil and stone, he was asked to help terraform the planet. He consumed and processed all the dead Martian soil, enriching it and making it possible for life to grow. Once the planet was transformed into planet Arakko, Xilo used his powers to create the Valley of the Fallen, honoring all the mutants who had been lost in Arakko's many wars. When the Great Ring had to vote on a huge decision, which was to either go back to Ameth to fight another war or stay on their new planet and build a peaceful life, Xilo voted for war. The vote ended in a tie, but Storm, the new leader of Arakko, casted the deciding vote for peace, so they stayed. And in a final cool character moment, Storm was looking for someone to replace Magneto on Krakoa's Quiet Council. She talked to Xilo and a couple of other Iraqi leaders about it, but they all turned her down. To them, taking a position of power without having to fight for it would be an insult. Battle-scarred Chronicle. From Eternals War to Genesis War. Things get really rough for Xilo during the big war with the Eternals. While most of the fighting was happening on Earth, a heavy hitter, Uranus, was sent to attack Arakko, and he went straight for the leadership. Xilo was almost completely wiped out in the attack. His body mass was torn apart, leaving him with less than 14% of his original form. And since his body is his memory, losing that much of himself meant that millennia of history he had personally witnessed were just gone. To survive, he had to hide himself and Lotus Logos until Uranus finished his rampage and left. After the war, Xilo was devastated by this loss of memory. He felt like he wasn't really Xilo anymore. He had lost so much of what actually made him that he felt like he had lost his real identity. For the time being, he started calling himself that which was Xilo. This had some immediate consequences. The Great Ring gathered to judge Iska the Unbeaten, who had killed another council member right as the attack began. But Horus Arata, the keeper of the law, had no rule that fit the situation. And when they turned to Xilo for a historical precedent, he couldn't help. The records were gone from his mind. Iska got all smug about it, but they still managed to kick her out of the Great Ring. Not long after that, Genesis, Apocalypse's wife, returned to Arakko and criticized the Great Ring for failing to protect the planet. That which was Xilo watched her and realized that he was at a huge disadvantage. Genesis was once a massive part of his record, but with those memories gone, he couldn't predict her actions at all. He decided that to survive in his weakened state, he had to fuse with someone else. He joined Storm's side, and after thinking about who to merge with, he settled on Fisher King. The reason for this choice of action was kind of poetic, as they were both nameless beings who had lost their old identities. Xilo fused into the left side of Fisher King's body. He stayed mostly dormant, letting Fisher King keep his own personality and act for both of them. Fisher King would give tactical advice to Storm's team, while Xilo would give him these creepy, unclear warnings by making the worms of his body squirm within Fisher King's blood, bones, and heart. This all comes to a head in the final battle. When Aura Sarada is blinded, Fisher King uses the chaos to get close to her. Then, in a wild move, Xilo leaves Fisher King's body to take control of Aura Sarada's instead, uniting the seats of law and history into a new being called Xilo Ra. Right after Storm defeats Genesis, another warrior wants to keep the battle going, but Xilo Ra steps in, kills him, and declares that the war is over. Talk about making a statement. Xilo wields Omega-level Earth manipulation and immortality. So let's get into what Xilo can actually do, because his powers are on a whole other level. First off, Xilo is officially an Omega-level mutant. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the absolute highest classification, meaning his power has no definable upper limit. And remember, he's a swarm of insects all acting as one being. He can hold himself together in a single form or break apart into what looks like countless moving tendrils. His main and most impressive power is his control over Earth and stone. The best example of this is when the mutants decided to terraform Mars. Xilo was the MVP. He merged with the planet's soil, breaking it down and pumping it full of nutrients and minerals. He even created tiny life forms that helped build a breathable atmosphere from scratch. He fundamentally changed the planet to make it livable. Being an insect collective also makes him practically immortal. Think about it. He's been around for 2 billion years. If parts of him get destroyed, he can replenish his swarm and keep on going. And don't let the fact that he's made of bugs fool you. He's incredibly dangerous up close. His tendrils are strong enough to strip a person down to the bone in a few seconds. But his most unique and frankly terrifying power is possession. Xilo can physically merge his own body into another person's, taking them over. He does this by literally replacing their flesh with his own. As you can imagine, this means that once he decides to leave, the host dies from the massive injuries because, well, parts of them are gone. This is exactly what happened to Fisher King. While he's controlling someone, Xilo can use both his own powers and the powers of the person he's possessing. The strange thing is that his degree of control appears to vary according to the circumstance. Xilo was largely dormant when he merged with Fisher King. Fisher King was still in control, speaking and behaving as he pleased, with Xilo warning him from inside on occasion. But when Xilo took over Aura Sarada, he was completely in charge. The comics don't give a clear reason why, but it most likely comes down to a few things. It could be about Xylo's intentions, whether the host is willing or not, or how much of himself he merges with them. Fisher King was a willing partner, thus only merged partially. Aura Sarada, on the other hand, was taken over completely against her will. Xylo's memory loss is his greatest weakness. Every superhero has a weakness. For Superman, it's kryptonite. But what about Xilo? His is way more interesting, and honestly, kind of tragic. Even though Xilo is an Omega-level mutant who can literally reshape planets, he has this one major vulnerability that's tied directly to what he is. Since he's a living swarm of insects, his physical body is also his hard drive. All the historical knowledge he carries is stored within that collective form. So if he takes a bad hit and loses a chunk of his body, he permanently loses all the history and memories stored in that part forever. The whole idea is rooted in his very nature as a living library for his people, the Araki. Think about what that actually means. Attacking Xilo is an attack on his people's culture and their entire history. When he gets hurt, it's like someone is burning down a library full of irreplaceable books. But here's the big question that the fans debate about. Is it really his greatest weakness? The thing is, even though it's a huge and devastating vulnerability in theory, we haven't really seen his enemies use it against him all that much in the comics. It's a documented threat for sure, but it hasn't been a central plot point where villains are actively trying to give him amnesia. So calling it his greatest weakness is more of an interpretation than a hard fact. You can compare it to other powerful mutants. Take Wolverine for example. His adamantium skeleton is awesome, but it also makes him a walking target for anyone with magnetic powers. Like Magneto. That's something that gets used against him all the time. Xilo's memory problem is a lot more subtle and complicated than that. Xilo's true name remains lost to time. Let's get into some of the cool little details about Xilo's personality. First up, like pretty much every other mutant from Arakko, he seems to dislike Tarn the Uncaring. That guy doesn't have a lot of fans, and Xilo is definitely not one of them. And when it comes to pronouns, writers have used both he and they to describe him, and he doesn't seem to have a preference. Now, about his name, Xilo is what he's calling himself right now. He's had a bunch of different names over the years, and there's a really sad reason for that, which comes directly from one of the comic writers, Steve Orlando. Remember how Xilo survived the downfall of that ancient group called the Threshold 2 billion years ago? Well, according to the writer, he was so badly hurt, both physically and mentally, that it took him millions of years to heal and regrow from almost nothing. But the person who healed was essentially a blank slate. Basically, the trauma of that event wiped his memory clean. He probably has little to no memory of his life with the Threshold, and it's almost certain that he doesn't even remember what his original name was. He's been picking new ones as he goes. Marvelous verdict. And that's the story of Xilo, a 2 billion year old being made of bugs who can shape planets with a thought, but whose very soul can be chipped away with every physical injury. That is just incredible writing. For me, Xilo is one of the most fascinating and creative characters Marvel has introduced in years. But I really want to know what you guys think. Is that memory loss vulnerability the most unique weakness in comics? Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.